Is time the linear progression we have all been conditioned to believe? Or is all of time existing at the same time in layers that occasionally bleed through onto one another? Can we actually see into the future? And what happens if we see ourselves? I'm Carol Ann. Welcome to the InBetween. If it's one thing you guys are great at, it's letting us know how much you love your time slip stories. Time slips. So here we are with another batch of stories. Everything from Time Slip's greatest hits to your personal stories. So settle in as we start this episode with one of the all-time classic time slip stories. If you are a fan of time slips and haven't heard this one yet, you are in for a treat. If you have heard it, stick around because I found all kinds of details about the aftermath that I had never heard before. So I'm betting there's a good chance you haven't either. With that said, on with the story. It's a crisp October morning in 1957, the English countryside of Suffolk spreading out like a patchwork quilt of beautiful yellows and oranges under a bright sky. 3 15-year-old Navy cadets, William Ling from Scotland, Michael Crowley from Worcestershire, and Ray Baker from London, are on a straightforward orienteering exercise from the Royal Naval College based at Greenwich. For these kinds of exercises, students are usually given the name of where they have to go, which can be a good distance away. In this case, the boys were assigned to find Kersey, which is almost 60 miles away from the Naval College as the crow flies. So the boys presumably hopped on a train, got off at the closest stop, and started hoofing it. Maps and compasses in hand, they navigate several miles of rural terrain toward the village of Kersey. They crest a gentle hill and are met with that beautiful fall quilt of fields and meadows and the tall spire of St. Mary's Church in the distance with its bells announcing that it's time for church. They made it! Chimney smoke puffs dot the sky and cows moo in the fields. All about as ordinary as it gets. They walk down the hill and cross the small bridge into the village. But as soon as they cross that bridge, the church bells stop, and so does everything else. Nothing is moving. No birds singing. The ducks in the creek look like statues. Not even a leaf is moving on the trees. Not to mention that the trees are in full-on green bloom, and not the oranges and yellows and browns of fall like everywhere else. An unnatural quiet floods their ears as a feeling of heavy air pushes down on them. William feels an overwhelming sadness wash over him, mingled with depression and a tingling feeling of being watched. The street is not so much a street, but a wide pathway of hard brown dirt. And it's empty. No villagers, no kids, no dogs, not one sign of life anywhere. The boys exchange uneasy glances. Where is everyone? As they start to look a little closer, they notice that there's no telltale signs of electricity anywhere. No phone lines or even TV antennas. And the houses just look off from what they would expect to see. The glass windows are small and dark, made with a dull greenish glass. The thatched roofs are sagging and the walls look like they're not doing a whole lot better. As they continue slowly walking down the dirt road, they notice that there aren't nearly as many houses as they thought there would be. The whole village is way smaller than they expected. As they keep going, they spot a butcher shop not far from the little stream where they had crossed the bridge. The doors open, and as the boys slowly crawl forward to take a peek inside, they are greeted with the sight of hanging slabs of ox carcasses, green and slimy, dusty and full of cobwebs. But there's no butcher in sight. Nearby, building signs are faded and cottages are empty shells with their doors hanging open. The boys start to freak out. Michael feels a chill race down his spine, hairs standing on end. Roy, who's usually the class clown, goes pale and quiet. They start walking a little faster, hearts hammering in their chests as that ominous feeling they all feel keeps getting stronger and stronger. The stillness isn't peaceful. It's all kinds of wrong. Finally, none of them can stand it anymore, and they break into a run, heading right back in the direction they came from. And they don't stop until they get back up to the crest of that hill before they stop and dare to take a look back. As they do, they see the veil lift. They see smoke rising again from the chimneys, hear dogs barking and people talking. Kersey is back to normal. Completely wigged out, the boys scribble down the notes they need to take for their assignment and double time it back to base. They tell their superiors what they encountered, but is there the slightest chance anyone believes them? Of course not. Their superiors just shrug it off as the wild imagination of three teenage boys. Life moves on, and the three boys' lives move off in different directions. William moves to Australia in 1968 and sets up a new life there. Roll on to 1988, and he's reading a book by Andrew Carr Mackenzie from 1982 called Hauntings and Apparitions, where Andrew puts out a call for readers to contact him if they have any interesting encounters. After 30 years of keeping the story under wraps so no one would call him nuts, William sends Andrew a letter with the story of what happened to him, Michael, and Ray in 1957. And Andrew is more than a little interested. He manages to track down Michael, who coincidentally also had moved to Australia, and Ray, who had moved to London. He interviewed all three men, dug into the historical records of the village, and even interviewed some of the Kersey residents. Turns out, Kersey actually dates back to sometime before 990 AD. Andrew and William took a road trip to visit in 1990 just so William could better explain what they saw as boys as compared to what's there now. The butcher shop is no longer a butcher shop, but the building is still there. It was a butcher shop from at least 1790 all the way up to 1905, when it became a general store, and a sweet shop until 1970, when I presume it became just a regular residence and is now known as Bridge House. Now, for those who say, well, they were just city kids who weren't used to seeing what some of the outlying villages look like, pictures of the main street through town, which is called, and I love this, the street, just the street, show a quaint little village with nice buildings and nice windows, not some village-wide pre-Victorian immersion cosplay park. The butcher shop the boys saw was not a butcher shop in 1957, and Andrew had to talk to some of the older residents of the village and dig into village records on site to find out when it stopped being a butcher shop. So even if William had decided to concoct some crazy story as an adult just for attention, he would have had to travel all the way from Australia to Kersey to dig for that information. Not likely. And Andrew's interviews of the boys are interesting. They don't tell the exact same story. Michael's version is pretty close to William's, but Ray says he doesn't remember anything really being weird about the place. And that difference in their recollection is kind of interesting. I would think that if these guys decided to make up a story involving all three of them, that all three stories would match. The fact that they don't match makes me that much more inclined to believe them. And for those who say it must have been a shared hallucination, try again. Hallucinations are the perception of sensory input, like seeing something or hearing something that doesn't correspond to reality. But that sensory perception is, by definition, a personal experience. You cannot share your perception of something that doesn't exist with someone else. So, what did they see? Obviously, no one knows for sure. But if you are ever in the area and happen to be walking along the tops of the surrounding hills and see nothing moving in the village below, maybe think twice before you decide to go visit. This next encounter comes from an in-betweener named Lainey, who's sharing a story that happened to her brother, Theo. Lainey Theo and their family grew up in Bellevue in Alberta, Canada, which is one of those small towns where everybody knows everybody. The broader area is known as Crow's Nest Pass, a beautiful area of the Canadian Rockies, mostly made up of 5 small towns: Bellevue, Hillcrest, Frank, Blairmore, and Coleman. This area is gorgeous, but has a bit of weirdness all its own. In 1903, part of Turtle Mountain collapsed, creating a huge rock slide that partially buried the town of Frank. It's unknown how many people actually died, but estimates are somewhere between 70 and 90 people. And then in 1914, another 189 people died in a mine explosion in Hillcrest. So, needless to say, the Crow's Nest Pass area is fertile ground for stories of hauntings and weirdness. Some say it was cursed a long time ago by the Blackfoot Indians who once lived in the territory. Or maybe the land itself was haunted before they even got there. Lainey herself has a number of odd stories of things that have happened to her, but today's encounter belongs to Theo. Theo's story takes place at the intersection of 21st Avenue and Highway 3, which is the main highway through the area. There is a stop sign on 21st Avenue that you have to stop at before turning onto Highway 3. Now, keep in mind that Theo's family has lived there their whole lives. They've all hit that intersection hundreds of times at all hours in all seasons. And since you're turning onto a highway there, it's just a given that you have to stop to look for highway traffic. So this encounter happens around 2008. It's a clear night, and Theo is on his way to Blairmore one night and hits that stop sign. As he rolls on up in his Dodge Neon, he gets the strange physical sensation like a vibration, or maybe almost like an electrical charge, as he's slowing down to turn onto the highway. Unfortunately for Theo, the sensation is more on his mind than the stop sign. He's never run the sign before, but this particular night, he's not so sure. All he can think about is the feeling. But he keeps going and makes his right turn onto the highway. As soon as he does, he sees a single red cherry light in his rearview mirror. Damn, where did he come from? And why is there only one red light and not the full-on light bar that most cars have? He can see that the car behind him looks kind of old, not like one of the modern cruisers usually patrolling the area. But whatever. He pulls into the viewing area right ahead of him and is immediately struck by a really bad feeling that something here is not right. He starts thinking, maybe this isn't a real cop. Maybe it's some crazy dude carjacker or serial killer. He thinks about just taking off, but if he's wrong and this is a real cop, then he's totally cooked. And there's something else that's off. There's a stillness to everything. No traffic, no noise. Theo can see the officer get out of his car and start walking toward him. And his feeling of dread that he is about to become a crime statistic doesn't get any better when he gets a good look. Everything about this guy is off. He has light reddish brown hair past his shoulders and a beard. He has no hat and has on a long-sleeved gray shirt with matching gray pants that looks more like the uniform out of the Dukes of Hazzard than anything worn by law enforcement around Crow's Nest Pass. Theo also notices that he walks with this weird gait, almost more like a waddle, like maybe he'd had some kind of injury in the past. But that's not quite right either. It's like the guy looks human, but doesn't walk like one. The officer barks at Theo. "You ran the stop sign." Theo hands over his license, and the officer stares at it for a minute and says, "This looks strange." But he turns and takes it back to the patrol car. Theo's a little confused. It's the same license everyone else in the area has, but he keeps his mouth shut. When the officer returns, Theo casually throws out that he's applying to the RCMP, so if there's any way that he can avoid getting a ticket, he would appreciate it. The officer lets him off with a warning, but before he turns to leave, tells Theo, "That's a strange-looking car." Theo says, "What do you mean?" The officer just says, "Never mind," and waddles away. Theo, breathing a huge sigh of relief, looks down to put his license back in his wallet. When he looks back up, all of 3 seconds later, the cop and his car are gone. There wasn't even enough time for the guy to walk back to his car, let alone get in and drive off. Theo gets out of his car and looks around, but there's nothing and no one around. The feeling of dread rushes back in, and Theo wastes no time getting back in his car and taking off. About 2 seconds after merging back onto the highway, he feels that same buzzing sensation again, but less intense this time. And then everything, the traffic noise, the whole night, goes back to normal. Theo tells his family what happened, and they do some research into trying to identify what he saw that night. The best that they can do is find a model of police cruiser that is the closest thing to the model of car that Theo saw behind him, which turns out to be a 1950s Chevy Deluxe with rounded fenders and a bubble cherry on the top. So, is this a time slip? Did some cop go home after his shift sometime in the 50s and tell his wife about the strangest looking car he pulled over in Bellevue that night? But if this was a time slip from the 1950s, why would the officer have hippie-length hair and a beard? That doesn't sound like anything I've ever seen coming out of the 50s. Theo is still creeped out about hitting that intersection on clear nights to this day. And Lainey is still a little creeped out from Theo telling her that the guy looked human, but he sure didn't walk like one. Now, we Gen Xers have been waiting for Skynet to come online for decades. We know it's coming. And this next story might just be the proof we've been waiting for. The story comes from paranormal researcher and author Tom Sleeman. In 2005, he was visited by a woman who told him the story of an encounter her husband, Jim, had back in the 50s. Jim was a policeman, and on this particular night, Jim is directing traffic at an intersection at Charing Cross in Birkenhead, which is the city right across the River Mersey from downtown Liverpool. This intersection is particularly gnarly.
Oh, gnarly!
With 5 streets all coming together in one spot. On this night, a super heavy fog rolls in. The can't see your own toes kind of thick. But that wasn't stopping people from cruising on by at regular speeds. A truck had stalled close to the intersection, so Jim is trying his best to direct traffic around it as it's getting dark and rush hour is ramping up. He even gets hit by a guy on a bike. As he's trying to control the increasing chaos around him, all of a sudden, everything goes quiet. He's looking around, wondering what happened to the flurry of cars that was just there a second ago, when he hears this low rumbling that he could actually feel through his feet on the road. It's shaking the ground enough that his teeth are chattering. But the fog is so thick, he can't see anything. He can hear whatever it is, it's getting louder. He keeps looking around for the source until he sees the faint shadow of something coming toward him from Grange Road West. As the figure cuts through the fog, getting clearer and clearer, Jim could swear that what is rumbling toward him is a tank. Except this tank is huge, like big as a house huge, with a dome on the top emitting red beams of light. Jim is gobsmacked. He's never seen anything like this in his life. Between the low visibility of the fog and the low processing power of his brain in that instant, it took him almost 1 second too long to figure out this thing is heading right for him. He manages to jump out of the way of the ginormous rolling tracks at the last second, but before he can feel any relief at that small victory, he is hit with a new problem. Behind the gargantuan tank is what looks like a robot, but it's about 20 feet tall. The robot walks toward Jim, slows down, and stops in front of him. A massive metal hand reaches out like it's trying to grab him. Jim picks flight from the fight or flight options and starts running. As he looks back to see if this thing is coming after him, he sees there are more of these robot things. But before he can get any further, an explosion of sound hits him as the normal noises of rush hour come crashing back. As the fog thins a bit, Jim looks around and figures out that he is not at the Charing Cross intersection anymore. He's now across the river in Liverpool, standing next to the Martin's Bank building, about 2 miles away from where he'd been standing at just a second ago. And everything is back to normal. No tanks, no robots.
I'll be back.
Jim didn't tell anyone about his encounter except his wife, and then only after many years. And I would be in complete dereliction of duty if I did not point out that the Martin's Bank building is less than a half a mile from Bold Street. Coincidence? Doubtful. This story is from one of our own in-betweeners named Lara, who experienced something truly head-scratching worthy in 1994 in Elma, Washington. Now, to set this up, the main event happened on the 4th of July, but a couple of days prior, Lara and her cousins are hanging out on the deck of her cousin's house, chatting away, when they all see something huge streak across the sky, lighting up the whole thing. They thought it was a meteor, and it was so spectacular that they called their parents to tell them about it, and even watched the news the next day to see if anyone else had seen it. Now, we have no way of knowing whether or not that incident relates to this next incident. This particular night, 4th of July, Lara, her family, and an entire gaggle of cousins, including the A cousins, Aaron, Amber, Angela, and Anthony, pile into 2 cars and head to the fairgrounds, which is only about a 10-minute drive from their cousin's house. Everybody's having a great time walking around, watching the fireworks, running into and chatting with other kids they know from school. But eventually, the younger ones run out of steam. So Lara's dad volunteers to take the first carload back to the house of their cousins, the Lutes. So that group leaves, while Lara and the rest of them stay for a few more minutes. But doesn't take long, maybe another 15-20 minutes before the fireworks are over and there's no one left to flirt with, so they too decide to leave. So everyone in the second car piles in and they take off for the Lutz' house to drop them off. When they get there, the house is all dark. They knock on all the doors and they go around and look in the back, but no one's there. Well, that's weird. The first car left at least 20 minutes before the second car did. How can they not be home? So they figure that the first car must have changed their minds and gone to Lara's house instead. So they all pile back into the car and head over there. But that house is all dark too. They go inside, but nobody's around. They call the Lutz's house to check that they didn't accidentally pass them along the way somehow, but no one answers the phone. Everyone is completely stumped. Where could they have gone? They explicitly said they were going to the Lutz's and that everyone in the second car should meet them there. At first, they were confused, but now they're getting scared. But not knowing what else to do, they all pile into the car again and head back to the Lutz's. Right before they get to the house, they pass some tennis courts with people playing. The tennis court is right behind the Lutz's house. One of the players, a friend of one of the many cousins, flags them down. They roll down their windows and the guy asks them, "Where have you been?" They say, "What do you mean, where have we been?" He says, "We've been waiting for you." Now, they're really confused. So they roll on to the house only to find everyone there. Lara's dad is kicked back on the couch. The older kids are chilling in front of the TV with snacks, and one of the younger kids is asleep already. Once Lara's group, the second car, sees everyone sitting around like nothing's happened, they all figure it must be a practical joke. And they're pissed. How could you guys do that to us? We were terrified something happened and you were in the hospital or something. Everyone at the house just stares back at them. What are you talking about? We've been here the whole time. No, you haven't. We were here and you weren't. And they all said, We didn't go anywhere. We came straight home from the fairgrounds and have been here the whole time. So how could the first car have left 20 minutes before the second car, but not be at home when the second car gets there? And remember, nobody at the Lutz's house answered the phone when they called either. Lara was a little on the young side to really understand the significance of what happened to the whole carload of family that day. Wasn't until she got older that she discovered the crazy rabbit hole of time slips. And now she wonders if that's a rabbit hole to which her whole car of family members has already been to the bottom. This time slip story comes from another in-betweener named Angie. In 2006, Angie graduates from high school and immediately feels that pull to have a place of her own. So she moves out of her parents' place to a small town called Bardesville, Kentucky. One afternoon, Angie's walking around town, kind of trying to get familiar with her new surroundings. As she's walking along, this really heavy feeling comes over her. Then her head starts swimming like she's in a complete fog. When the fog clears, she looks around and sees several really old cars running up and down the street. Not a real surprise, Bardstown is certainly no stranger to the occasional collector car show. In fact, they're a pretty regular occurrence. So, no big deal, she keeps walking. But then she happens to glance into a store window and sees antique furniture. She decides to go in and check it out, but when she walks through the door, she finds herself in a bookstore. The bookstore owners say hi to her and ask if she's all right. Obviously, the confusion she's feeling on the inside must be showing on the outside as well. Angie says, "I thought this was a furniture store." The bookstore owners tell her, "Well, it used to be, but that moved down the street years ago." Angie says, "But I just saw furniture in the window." The bookstore owners actually told her, "You must have had a time slip." Not having any idea what they were referring to, and actually thinking it was kind of their bless your heart way of calling her crazy, Angie actually got mad and walked out. She looked back, but there was still no furniture. Fast forward to today, and Angie has seen numerous videos just like this one and realizes they were right. And now she wishes she could go back, not only to apologize to the bookstore owners for her rude behavior, but also because a bookstore just might have been a good place to find information on time slips. This story comes from a Redditor named Mindsmog, let's just call him Mike, who posted this just 8 months ago. When he was just a kid, Mike was riding a bus home from a friend's house. As the bus rolls along and starts its way down a hill, Mike glances out the window and sees himself walking up the hill. The him he sees is older, but he knows that's himself. For one brief second, the two Mikes look directly at each other. And then the older Mike is gone and the bus moves on. Mike thought about this encounter for weeks afterward, trying to decide if he really saw himself and what it all meant. 10 years later, Mike is walking up that same hill. He looks up from the sidewalk to see a bus coming toward him down the hill. In that second, Mike knew what he was going to see when the bus passed him. He was going to see his younger self. The bus passes. Mike looks up, and there he is, his younger version looking down at him. And in that brief second, older Mike is now vindicated. What he saw as a kid 10 years ago was real. That really happened. But then the second passed, and the bus vanished. Mike has walked that hill several times since this encounter, and sadly has never been able to recreate this magical moment. I think what I find most interesting about this story is the idea that if you knew you were going to see your younger self at some point in the future and you only had a split second to say something, what would you say? People in the comments of the post were joking that he should have told himself, "Don't sell your Bitcoin." But I think if I had had that opportunity, the one thing I would tell myself is don't waste it. I gotta admit, telling your past self, don't sell your Bitcoin, it's a brilliant move. If you want to continue down the wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey, time-slip timeline,
Wibbly wobbly, timey wimey,
click right here. Some of you probably already know you're gonna do that. Be careful out there. And I will see you here again on the In-Between.